Hello everyone, welcome to my video series on extraordinary, ordinary people of the Bible. Today is my third segment on Moses, or the study of Moses, an extraordinary, ordinary man. Go ahead and click on the like and subscribe button if you like what I am saying regarding Moses, an extraordinary, ordinary man. Okay, so let us review the life of Moses. Now you got to remember that Moses, he lived 120 years. So he died at 120. But if you look at the life of, examine the life of Moses very carefully, you will note that you can put his life into three 40-year segments. The first 40-year segment has to do with Moses in Egypt, from birth to the time he was exiled. And he thought he was somebody. The second 40-year segment is the time when Moses was in the desert, in which he knew he was nobody. And then the last segment of his life was when Moses was in the wilderness and he learned that God, Jehovah God, could turn a nobody into a somebody. Okay? Now you got to remember that when Moses entered the world, it was a dark period of time. Satan was trying to get rid of any lineage to Jesus, okay? And you can relate that back to the first prophecy in the Bible, in which the Lord himself told when Eve, she ate the apple or a fruit, okay, related to the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and she gave it to Adam, and Adam partaked of the fruit. No one knows it was an apple or orange or what type of fruit it was. No one really knows. The Bible does not specify, but it was from the fruit of knowledge of good and bad, of good and evil. Okay? And so at that time, the Lord, in the third chapter of Genesis, he gave his first prophecy in the Bible. And he said well, she was known as the woman at that time. And he said to the woman, there's going to be trouble between your seed and the seed of Satan, the deceiver. And you will bruise his seed in the head, and he will bruise your seed in the heel. Okay? So that was related to the first prophecy of the Bible. Satan has been trying to get rid of any lineage to Jesus from that time on. Okay? We can relate. So what I'm trying to get at is when Pharaoh, under Satan's influence, under satanic influence, tried to get rid of the male children in Egypt, the male newborn children in Egypt, by drowning them in the Nile through his decree, he was under satanic influence. And you can also relate that to the time of Jesus' birth, when Herod tried to get rid of all of the male children in the vicinity and in the town of Bethlehem. He made a decree that all male children should die 2 years and under. Okay. Harold the Great was a interesting person in the Bible. He was actually an ethnic Arab. Ethnically, he was an Arab, but he was a practicing Jew at that time in many ways. Okay? And he was a very capable administrator and politician of that time. but he was also very, very paranoid. Okay? And so the soothsayer said that there was going to be a king of the Jews born. And he was thinking, okay, now if they're the soothsayers and the prophets in that area are saying that there's going to be a king of the Jews, uh, then that would mean that king is going to take my place. So I got to off this guy. And under Satan's spell and satanic influence, he tried to kill all the Jewish babies in the town and in the vicinity of Bethlehem. Okay, 2 years and under. You got to understand this though. There's only one reference in the Bible to what is called the massacre of the innocents. And this massacre occurred obviously during the time around the birth of Jesus. And it didn't, a lot of people are under the misconception that there was a huge number of babies killed and sacrificed during that time. You got to understand that Bethlehem had 12 to 1,500 people as a population. And then the babies born at that time, it really amounted to maybe a couple of dozen children at that time that were 2 years and under. So there's only one reference in the Bible, and that's in Matthew chapter 2, regarding the massacre of the innocents. Josephus, who is the primary historian in the Bible, doesn't even mention that in the Bible. It's not even mentioned. There's only one mention in the Bible regarding the massacre of the innocents, and that is in Matthew chapter 2. Okay? So really, people are making a huge deal. Yes, it is a deal because you are massacring children, but it wasn't the big deal that people normally associate with Herod. Was that something good? No. Was it something evil? Yes. Was it an influence from Satan? Probably. And you got to remember, Herod was very insecure and he was very paranoid about his reign of power that was given to him by the authority of the Roman government to be the king of Judea at that time. Okay, and he was known as the King of the Jews. Okay, so let us continue on to the dark period in which Moses came to be born. At that time, Amram, which was Moses' father, he actually married his aunt, his father's sister, and that was Jochebed. Okay, and Jochebed, I'm sorry, that was Jochebed. And during the time of Moses' birth, there are biblical scholars that have said that Amram actually divorced Jochebed right during the time that Moses was born. But he was convinced by Miriam, his daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, to don't do this. Don't do this, Dad. Come back to Mom. We need you. Don't do this. And she was successful in getting her father back to the household at that time. So it was a dark time for Moses in the time that he was born. Okay? And so we all know, if you relate back to my last segment, my second segment on Moses, the extraordinary, ordinary man, you will note that I left off during the time of Moses' birth, and he was rescued by Bethiah, the daughter of Pharaoh, who took pity on him and arranged for Jochebed to wean him until the time that he would enter to the palace to be raised by Bethiah and her aides as the Prince of Egypt. So this is where we're going to start. So Moses was educated in Egypt. You got to understand. No, look at the contrast between Moses, who was a child of the ghetto, he was very happy. He probably even know he was poor, you know. Um, and now he's in a palace, the finest palace in the world, and he probably had a whole suite to himself. Okay, so now he know he was poor. He was poor by the surroundings that he has now. And yes, he was probably very lonely. He missed his brother Aaron and all the hijinks that they had between each other. He missed the fussiness of his sister, his older sister Miriam. He missed the warmth of his mom and the leadership of his dad. He missed all that. And of course, he was educated in the religion of and the laws of the Hebrews faith at the time until he was weaned and sent over to the palace. So, yes, he missed all that. You would too. But now he's in a whole new foreign surrounding. Everything is new. But let me tell you something. He was educated with the finest teachers in the world. Imagine he had to learn science and theology and history and art and sculpture and most importantly, warfare. Now remember, he was being groomed as a warrior prince and a warrior king to be the future Pharaoh. Okay? And the Bible does state that Moses was powerful. He grew up as a young man to be powerful in speech and actions. They said it was inferred that he was extremely intelligent and he was bold and courageous in his actions as a prince in Egypt. Okay? Now, not all of the life of Moses is described in Exodus. There are some chapters in other books of the Bible that describe the life of Moses. For instance, Stephen, who was the first martyr in the Christian church, and he was also a deacon, he was summoned to the Sanhedrin to defend charges of blasphemy against the Jews. Okay? Now remember, the Sanhedrin was the ruling council of the Jewish community at the time. Okay? And in many ways probably still is. And it was like our Supreme Court of today, okay? And it was headed by a high priest, probably Caiaphas at this time. And you got to understand that at the time Stephen was summoned to the Sanhedrin, Stephen gave a defense of himself because he had to defend himself against charges of blasphemy against the Jews at that time, okay? And really, to be honest with you, the ruling powers in the Jewish society, they didn't have a high regard for the early Christians, okay? They thought that their traditional law, the Mosaic laws, were the ruling authority. They didn't really have a high regard for Jesus and his teachings, okay? And so they frequently persecuted and tried Christians of Christian faith for blasphemy and things of that nature. So Stephen, in his address to the Sanhedrin to defend himself against charges against blasphemy, he referred to Moses in Acts 7, verse 20 through 29. And he did say that Moses was powerful in speech and in actions. He also described that the time in which Moses killed an Egyptian. Okay? because Moses saw an Egyptian mistreating one of the slaves, and his heart was naturally fond of the Hebrew people. And it doesn't specifically say in the Bible that Moses at that time actually understood that he was Hebrew. He probably did. And he had a fondness for the Hebrew people. And so he defended the Hebrews. And so in his defense of the Hebrew, he saw a Egyptian slave master mistreat one of the Hebrews, and he killed him. Now, Moses remember, he was trained to be a warrior king, and he was probably very, very powerful at that time. And he looked here and there, and he killed that slave master and buried him in the sand. Imagine how strong a person has to be to bury a body in the sand. You know, it would take me a while to do that, but he did. Okay, and so and it came to pass, and this is all in Stephen's address to the Sanhedrin. It came to pass that he thought that he was going to be the deliverer himself of the Jewish nation. Without the Lord's influence, he was going to do it himself. Okay? And so the next day, he was riding out in his chariot, and all of a sudden he saw two Hebrews fighting. And so he rode up to him. He said, okay, y'all need to break this up, you know. And so one of the Hebrew slaves said, oh, who are you? Are you the king of, who are you? And are you going to kill me like you did that Egyptian yesterday? And so, yeah, they found out. How did they find this out? So he got scared. Moses got scared. And he knew that his secret was no longer a secret. And so he knew that if Pharaoh found this out, Pharaoh's going to kill him. And so he fled. And he fled into the desert. Now, we don't know if he took a chariot. We don't know if he took a horse. We don't know if he simply fled on foot, but he fled. And he fled until he got into an area called Midian. And he stopped at a well. And that's where I'm going to leave you. So, stay tuned for my next version of Moses, an extraordinary man, an extraordinary or ordinary man of the Bible. That will be segment number 4. Let us find out what happened to him at the well. So, without further ado, I thank you for your time, this time. Until next time, we'll be seeing you.